everybody an opportunity so they can develop and grow with their teammates, with their coaches, with the staff members, and with everybody else. But obviously, the paramount decision is going to be made on safety, and that's why we're one of the reasons we're talking today right now. A decision will be made on winter sports at a later date. There was some definitive dates that were talked about, but right now they're talking about towards the end of September of coming out with an answer as far as finalizing what the winter sports season is going to look like. Although this is a tough time, last year I do want to highlight some of the things that we accomplished as a department. Our fall sports won 6 of 8 conference championships in the WIAC, so that's obviously very special. Our winter sports, although they weren't able to finalize everything, we had numerous athletes compete for gymnastics, for bowling, for wrestling, and for men's and women's track and field. We also had 2 conference championships with women's basketball and women's bowling. Our football player, Matt Anderson, was named Academic All-American of the Year for the sport of football in the fall, which is pretty impressive. Last year, we had a record number of scholar athletes with 67. And when we talk about being a student and being an athlete, if you can get the Chancellor Scholar Athlete, that is probably the highest accolade you can get within our department. We had 67 of them last year, which is very special. Softball and baseball both had WIAC Scholar Athletes. Although they didn't have a season, they still nominated people and voted on the Scholar Athletes. So softball and baseball both had one. And then last but not least, we do have a Woman of the Year nomination from the WIC, Sarah Klemish, who was a goalie on the women's soccer team last year. So we're excited to see where that goes. She's with a group of about 40 to 50 females within Division III, and they'll be voting on the finalists for the Woman of the Year shortly. But either way, she's made it very, very far, and we're extremely proud of her and all the other accolades that our seniors and coaches and everybody else had the last couple of years, or the last year, excuse me. One of the reasons why UW-Whitewater is so special compared to our competitors is we have an amazing group of 16 head coaches and support staff that work with our student athletes, our parents, our spectators, our people across campus all over the place. But right now, they understand that what tomorrow's going to look like might be different than what September 5th is going to look like, or October 5th. So we're very fortunate that we have people in place that have created plans that can also pivot on a dime to create different plans to make sure that all of our student athletes and our staff are in the safest possible environment. I want to introduce the next 2 members that Chris briefly talked about, but both have been extremely vital in the decisions that have been made over the last couple months, and they've been around a long time. First, I'd like to introduce Coach Keri Carrallo. Coach Carrallo is not only our head women's basketball coach, but also our senior women's administrator and our lead compliance officer. Keri?
Thank you, Ryan. As a person that gets to be a part of 2 completely different roles within our department, it's been very eye-opening and humbling to see the major changes that we have gone through these last few months. So from a coach's perspective, I just want all of our student athletes to know that this administration and our athletic training staff has always put our student athletes' best interest in mind first, and wanting to make sure that we're not only providing an extremely safe situation for all of our student athletes and staff, but also making sure that we're staying competitive and that we're providing opportunities to maintain that level of competitiveness that we expect in our department and in our institution. And from an administrative standpoint, I'd like to say that I'm here to serve as a resource for everyone. I have the opportunity to be involved in all the upper administrative meetings and probably more meetings that I really love to be a part of. So I feel like I'm fairly strongly versed in all of the rules and policies, legislation to help assist and guide anyone that needs help. So please, I guess, don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. That would be my advice to everyone, is ask questions. If you're worried, concerned about anything, ask, and we are here to assist. We are hopeful for a safe return, and we're excited to see everyone back on campus.
Thanks, Keri. Next, I'd like to introduce Steve Hilmer. Steve's been with Warhawk Athletics for the past 20 years and is a leader in the athletic training industry. He currently is our Director of Sports Medicine and just completed a term on the National Athletic Training Association and Intercollegiate Council for Sports Medicine. Steve?
Thanks, Ryan. As Ryan said, I've been here 20 plus years, and never did I think I'd be sitting here talking about how we're going to try to deal with athletics in a pandemic. It's kind of my role kind of within athletics is to kind of coordinate all the medical care for all of our student athletes, working with our staff of athletic trainers and our team physicians. Since March, obviously, I've been kind of tasked with our COVID-19 response, what our policies and procedures are going to be, and how can we bring back students into a safe environment. I've also been our athletic representative on the Emergency Operations Center, our EOC, which works with all of our campus partnerships on campus to bring back the students safely to campus. Also been a member of our WIC Return to Sport Committee, working with all of our conference schools to try to develop policies for a safe return for not only the UW-Whitewater athletes, but also all the athletes throughout the conference as well.
All right, thank you. So now we'll begin with some questions. Just a reminder to our panelists, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. So the first question, what plans are in place for fall sports at this point? Will there be competition for fall teams in the spring?
I'm pretty sure we could talk for about the next 2 hours on what the plan is for fall sports, but much like all of you, you're watching the news, you're reading different articles, and we're doing the same. A lot of the information that all of you have access to, we have access to the same thing. So right now with the NCAA came out with the resocialization of sport. They have a checklist that you can find on ncaa.org for Division III, so you can take a look at exactly what we're looking at. As far as the fall sports, what we're looking to do is we're looking to provide a meaningful opportunity where they can grow and develop over the next few months in the fall season. Now, before we can do that, we have to figure out all of the testing needs for our different teams. Steve Hilmer, and I'll probably mention his name a lot in this, but he's done a great job of figuring out exactly what our teams need, what each team needs depending on their risk level. So if we'll go with football, for instance, that's a high risk level. It's a high risk sport. Obviously, there's a lot of contact. So we're trying to figure out what exactly that's going to look like for testing. So Steve created a document that has basically a percentage of rostered players and people in the bubble, which will be coaches, trainers, and strength and conditioning people. Which one of those people will be tested every other week? Per NCAA guidelines is that they're looking to test 35% of the roster every other week. Now, I was going to mention this a little bit later, but we just got word that Governor Evers has freed up around $32 million for UW system to increase their testing. Now, I wish this was just for athletics, but it's going to be for the general student population as well. But either way, that's going to help ease our testing needs and requirements, and hopefully help get our teams back in the field in a more meaningful and manner over the course of the next few months. So as of right now, we're looking to have a practice season for those fall sports. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but I will go back to what I said previously. Our 16 head coaches, and specifically the ones in the fall, because they're the first ones up, have done an amazing job as far as coming up with practice plans, coming up with pods, coming up with phases. I mean, they've done some really, really heavy lifting over the last couple of months to make sure that our student athletes are in a safe environment, and they get something out of it. It's a meaningful environment. The one thing I'm going to touch base on, I'm going to hand this over to Keri, is the NCAA just did come out with flexibility with transitioning from a week schedule to adding 114 days. So Keri, can you kind of touch base on that a little bit?
Sure. So what the NCAA has allowed our institution to do is they have given our sport coaches the flexibility to work within certain parameters or dates. to be able to use what's called 114 days of practice and competition. So each sport will be allowed to start and end practice within their certain guidelines, basically utilizing the entire academic year. So that then if a sport, for example, starts competition or starts their season, we'll use a winter sport as an example because fall sports have already been canceled. So a winter sport team starts practice as usual and competition, and then we have to end the season for whatever reason. This allows for more flexibility throughout the year. Track and field is a little unique because they have an indoor season and an outdoor season. So they actually get 4 days. So they get a little bit longer season. So I'll just really quickly just go through each fall, winter, and sports. So for fall sports, you could start practice the first day of classes, and then you have to be finished with your 114 days of practice or competition. And remember, these are going to be dictated by your sport coach 5 days prior to the end of the spring semester exams. For winter sports, you can start practice as early as October 1st for basketball, bowling, and wrestling. For all other sports, it's September 7th. And then with the same ending point, 5 days prior to exams in the spring. Spring sports are 114 days, but remember, indoor and outdoor track, 144 days. They can start as early as September 7th. And then the conclusion, hopefully, will be for them the end of the NCAA championships.
Awesome. Thank you, Keri. The last part of that question was, will there be competition for fall teams in the spring? We're still looking at that. I'm hopeful that we can provide some sort of exhibition competition for those sports that lost out of the competition in the fall. But again, that's going to be determined by, groups that are above me, whether it's the Board of Governors within the NCAA, the President's Council, or ultimately the chancellors of the UW system schools that are in the WIC. So again, if it was up to me, I would say yes, as long as we can maintain the safety. But hopefully we'll be getting some answers on that shortly. And honestly, hopefully the curve of the virus can go down and we can get back to some normalcy in a short period of time.
All right. The next question. What precautions will be taken by student athletes and staff during practice and workouts? Will there be social distancing? Will there be facial coverings?
Yeah, I'm going to pitch this to Steve, but I'll give my 2 cents first. Yes to everything. Ultimately, the checklist that we're being provided by the NCAA, we will follow to a T. Like I said, the student athlete and staff safety is paramount in every decision that we make. And a lot of these things are going to have, there's going to be some social distancing. There's going to be some facial coverings. And I'll be the first one to say there's going to be some discomfort. I know we have a staff member that went for a run in a mask and he said he almost passed out. So he's a little bit older, so it's a little bit different than, than all you young people, but there is going to be some discomfort with some of the things that have to take place. But, Steve, whatever you want to add on and interject, go for it.
Yep. On return to campus, each student athlete will be required to meet with one of the athletic trainers. We'll do kind of a preliminary health screen and also kind of try to establish what level of COVID exposure they may have had in the past over the summer or currently. Each day, our student athletes are going to be required to take a survey through an app about their symptoms. And before any activity, whether it's strength conditioning or any practices, a temperature check is going to be required of all of those student athletes. Social distancing, as Ryan said, is going to take place within practices, within the weight room. Obviously, some of the sports is going to be a lot easier than others. Golf, tennis, obviously a lot easier to social distance than football or soccer. We're going to initially work in some smaller pods, functional groups, to limit the number of exposure to kids and also our staff. So we'll be working in kind of small groups Some of the initial practices, we'll focus on skill development, kind of return to activity and kind of somewhat of normalcy. If our cases remain stable or decrease as time goes, we'll be able to expand kind of those groups as determined by the number of cases of COVID. And face mask coverings, as Ryan said, we're going to follow the emergency order number 1 from Governor Evers regarding face masks or face coverings, as the university vernacular is.
All right, thank you. The next question, will student athletes on fall teams lose a season of eligibility? What steps do they need to take to ensure that they are granted an extra season?
That's a great question. I'm sure a lot of you and parents and coaches and everybody are thinking about eligibility and how to maximize your participation while you're at school. And I'm going to kick this to Keri in a second, but I just want to make sure that when you don't listen to what other people are saying. Make sure that Coach Carrallo is involved with any discussion that you are having when it comes to eligibility. A lot of you probably have high school teammates that are going to school at a different place, or you met some people playing, summer ball or whatever it is. Whatever questions you have, make sure that Coach Carallo is being involved with that decision, and she's involved with every discussion that you have. So, Coach.
Yeah, so the simple answer is no. So if you participate, if you have opportunity in less than 50% or less of contests against outside competition, you will retain your season of eligibility. The other piece of this is that you will also not have to count your fall 2020 and spring 2021 semester when you are counting your total full-time semesters used. So that's another little piece of legislation that allows. So again, I'm going to say this again. You have to make sure that you participate in 50% or less of contests out against outside competition. So for our fall sport athletes, you will fall into this criteria. So you will be allowed to retain your season of eligibility, and you will also be able to retain the 2 semesters, fall 21 and spring 20. So the NCAA has really given us a lot of wiggle room to be able to utilize now for you 12 semesters, 12 full-time semesters. Remember, full-time is 12 or more credits.
All right, thank you, Keri. Next question, if we can't have organized practices with our coaches, can we practice on our own?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's going to be, the short answer is yes, you can practice on your own all you want. Now, obviously it can't be mandatory and you can't do, attendance and give it back to your coach. But, if you're a golfer and you want to go out to the local golf course and golf with your teammates, go for it. If you want to play some pickup basketball with your teammates, that's great. Some sports, as Steve said, are going to be a little bit easier. If you want to go for a run for cross country with your teammates, that's fantastic. But there are some rules, and I'm going to let Keri touch base on some of the rules and legislation that deals with some of the voluntary and involuntary workouts.
Yeah, so if it's a voluntary workout, which means anything with our strength and conditioning coach outside of use of a declared session, we will say with practice or competition with your coach, remember you're still going to have to follow the NCAA resocialization guidelines in regards to testing. So that's a piece of legislation that you have to keep in mind if you're thinking anything with our strength and conditioning staff. If you are thinking of doing like an outside amateur event or something that does not win a prize or win any kind of cash at the end of the event, and you are admitting or signing up for the event on your own, you're paying for the event on your own, then by all means participate, get out, be active, and if it's a safe environment, we definitely encourage it. I would just run it by your coach just so that they are aware that you are participating in those events, just so they can double check and make sure they're meeting all the criteria and guidelines as far as NCAA rules and then the conference rules that you're associated with. Or you can run it by me. Either way, I would just double check and make sure. Otherwise, I think that kind of covers everything, but if there's a unique situation that you plan on being a part of, again, I would just ask before you act. It's kind of a rule of thumb that we use with our coaches. So if there's an event that pops up that you're interested in, just shoot me a quick email and I'd be happy to help you.
Okay. Next question. What plans are in place for COVID-19 testing this fall?
Yeah, we touched base on that a little bit. Obviously, with the new word from Governor Evers and his administration, that's going to help us with the money paying for tests, but then it's also getting the test as well. So we do have plans in place, and I'll let Steve touch base on some of the high, medium risk sports and low risk sports and what that's going to look like.
I was really hoping Ryan was going to answer the $1 million question. As we've kind of referenced all through, the NCAA came out through resocialization of collegiate sport document about 2 weeks ago that kind of outlined the testing procedures. We're going to follow that document. Our chancellors have made it clear through the WIC that, you know, their wish is for us to follow that document, and that's what we're going to do. The NCAA broke the sports down into 3 different risk categories. So the low risk sports that we have include bowling, swimming and diving, golf, tennis, track and field, and cross country. Medium risk sports include baseball, gymnastics, and softball. Our high risk sports include basketball, football, soccer, volleyball, and wrestling. All categories, whether it's low, medium, or high risk, require a diagnostic test, meaning an initial test upon return to campus before doing any activity. The low risk groups only require symptomatic testing. So you only get retested if you have symptoms that develop during the school year. Our medium risk categories require surveillance testing, which, as Ryan said earlier, is testing a certain percentage of your roster every 2 weeks. And that is for preseason activities, in-season activities, postseason activities, and out-of-season activities as well with our strength conditioning. Our high-risk sports require surveillance testing during non-competition phases, the same as medium risk, but in-season, in competitive season, they require weekly testing. So everyone on the roster, including the coaches, would be tested once a week with the requirement of 72 hours before competition. Or if you're a sport that plays multiple times in a week, 72 hours prior to your first competition of that week. And the NCAA currently is recommending polymerase chain reaction, the PCR testing. So, you know, the nasal pharyngeal or the pharyngeal swab. There's some potential further on down the line, and obviously with some of the Governor Evers orders, they're going to use antigen testing. So we're going to investigate that as well. And then, you know, as Ryan said, you know, there's a large number of tests to kind of secure. We're working obviously with our university and UW system to secure those tests so that, you know, we have a plan that's solid and ready to go for when students return to campus.
All right. The next question, sort of a follow-up to that. What happens if there is a positive COVID-19 test on one of our teams?
Yeah, I'll let Steve answer the positive test when it comes to our athletic teams, but I'll cover just the university plan. And a lot of this goes back to maintaining social distancing and wearing our facial coverings within our respective classes. So for instance, if you're in, you know, English 101 and there's 15 kids in the class and everybody is social distancing and wearing a mask, and it comes to find out that one of the kids in that class tests positive, based on the CDC guidelines, ultimately nobody else in that class should have to do any sort of isolation or quarantine because you followed the necessary precautions of, you know, keeping your distance and wearing masks. So if that happens in in the general student body, what they're going to do is they're going to call or email the COVID-19 hotline. Then ultimately people are going to get notified of what happened, what the situation was. Then we're going to have some contact tracers and tracking, and then ultimately go through what that person did over the previous couple of days and determine whether or not others have to be quarantined and isolated. Now, it's going to be similar to athletics, but not necessarily exactly, because we are going to be in different situations. Obviously, with some of our high-risk sports, that's a little bit different than socially distancing, 10 feet desks apart. So, Steve, if you kind of want to add on to that, how that's going to look with athletics real quick.
Yep. I think the first thing I'll say is, there will be positive tests this year. I mean, if you've looked at, the testing across the country, it's not if we're going to have a positive test, it's going to be when we're going to have a positive test. Obviously, that student athlete will be removed from all activity. The individual will be encouraged to report to the COVID hotline on campus, which is going to handle all of, disseminating the information to the parties on campus. If the student is living in on-campus housing, we're going to work with university housing to move those students or student athletes into isolation. Our isolation dorm is going to be Clem Hall. So we have, over 130 spots, for isolation for our students. If the student is an off-campus member, we're going to ask them to isolate in their current residence. If they can't do that from a safety standpoint with their roommates and situations like that, obviously, then we would encourage the student athletes to go back home and possibly quarantine at home. If a student tests positive and is symptomatic, they will be isolated for a minimum of 10 days. Including 24 hours without a fever, without taking any medication. If a student athlete is positive and asymptomatic, they're going to be quarantined for 10 days. Anyone who's a close contact, the current CDC is, within six feet for more than 15 minutes, means all close contacts have to quarantine for 14 days. So as we've kind of alluded to, sports like soccer, basketball, there's potential for a high percentage of the roster to have to be quarantined if there is a possible exposure at those practices. That's why we're going to try to limit some of those exposures and try to work in smaller groups at the beginning.
I want to add on to that real quick. And I think, Steve, you really hit the nail on the head. It's not if we're going to have people testing positive, it's we are going to have people testing positive. And that's the reality of where we're at. And one of the things that I feel our university has done an excellent job of is waiting to see how this progresses, whether it's within legislature, whether it's within the virus in general, our community, our county, whatever it is. And if you were to pay attention to some of the professional sports that are going on, I'll point out Major League Baseball. There's been a number of teams that had to pause and not play and do all that, and that very well may happen with some of our teams that are on campus. So that's in my intro. That's what makes our place so special, is that our 16 head coaches and staff, they're going to be able to pivot, and switch, turn on a dime and figure out a different practice plan and have that constant communication, not only with the university, but also our training professionals. And, like I said, just to reiterate what Steve said, it's not if there's a positive test, it's when there's a positive test. So I think your answer was spot on, but I think we have a plan in place that'll keep everybody else safe, as far as the athletes that do not have COVID-19.
Okay, next question is sort of related to the previous two, submitted by a community member. Holding athletics is a big risk toward the community. Thousands of students are coming back to campus. What is the plan as far as anticipating a rapid spread of the virus?
There's a lot of layers to that question, and the first layer is ultimately we have to be smart and we have to know what set an example as far as staff and head coaches and assistant coaches, as well as wearing our mask, while it's social distancing. If we have a meeting with a student, it's got to be in a larger space in our office. So I think a lot of it's going to come down to the leaders on our campus of making that, setting a good example of having like I said, wearing a facial covering and making sure that you're social distancing. One of the questions that I've asked our coaches a long time ago was, do we have unrealistic expectations for our student athletes? And I go back to Major League Baseball. Obviously, they weren't necessarily mature enough to make some of the good decisions about, maintaining their bubble. And I think some of our student athletes will leave the bubble that they're put in. I was working with Steve this morning, and we were talking about basketball and creating pods of 4 or 5, and ultimately you're in that pod. You will hang out with that pod. You will go to dinner with that pod. You will do all that within that pod. And ultimately, I don't know if that's realistic, but I think those are the things that we have to try to limit the exposure that our student athletes have with the general student population. If you are a women's basketball player, try to limit your exposure to only the women's basketball team, as well as the coaching and some other staff, whether it's strength and conditioning and training. But there is a reality into that. Some might go home on a Sunday to get their laundry done, or go see their partner or whatever it is, and we're going to expect that. So, like I said in the beginning, we're going to do our best to model good behavior and ultimately provide our student athletes with enough PPE that they're never going to a place where they're not able to wear a mask, or they're not able to socially distance, whatever that may be. We're going to model that behavior and make sure that they're doing it in their personal lives as well. When it comes to the spread, I think this is where testing comes into play as well. And I know the knock on testing is that it's a moment in time. It's not necessarily going to prevent you. It's not a vaccine. But I think that's where testing can help can help stop spread the COVID-19. Is whereas you have it, now you got to get quarantined. Instead of not knowing you have it, then you can go to a practice, go to a class, go to a restaurant, whatever it is. So I think those are the two parts that we're really working on as far as the campus is modeling good behavior, and making sure that our student athletes have enough PPE so they can live and operate safely, as well as providing enough testing so we know when somebody tests positive, we can isolate that person so they're not spreading the virus. So, Steve, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add that obviously athletics is part of the campus community. It's not, our separate, entities stand alone, so it's not only athletics who's going to have to be responsible as a campus partner, but it's everyone on campus, all of our students, all of our student athletes, our staff have to, follow the best practices of social distancing, hand washing, face coverings, et cetera. And it's going to be imperative not only for our student athletes, but all of our campus community, whether it's other students and staff, to, if you're ill, report your symptoms, be honest. Currently there's going to be no awards if you, think you just have an illness and you go through practice and then suddenly you pass the infection along to 13 teammates and everyone has to quarantine for 2 weeks. So, part of it's being realistic with yourself so that you can look out for yourself, but also kind of your teammates and the greater campus community as well. And then obviously we're in contact with University Health to kind of monitor what's going on in campus as well, not just our student athletes.
Okay, the next question. When will the weight room be open, and will strength and conditioning and athletic training services be available?
Yeah, that's I feel like I pushed that off for the last 2 weeks now, but the EOSC finally approved the plan for opening the weight room. So August 17th, we will have a soft opening in the weight room. I'm not positive as far as the capacity that they're going to approve, but we do have a plan in place, and we'll be working on that plan next week with a soft opening on the 17th. Once the weight room opens on the 17th, the rest of the Williams Center and the field house will have some soft openings, and we're currently waiting on some signage from the university so we can put the signage up all around the Williams Center and within the field house. So, as you get coming back to campus, just making sure that you're following the appropriate signage and And like Steve said, you're washing your hands, wearing a mask, and maintaining social distancing. So, and I'll let Steve talk about the training room.
Yes, the athletic training will be open once kind of the building reopens. Will it look different from previous years? Yes. Obviously, we're going to have a smaller capacity. Right now it's somewhere around 8 to 10, including our staff members. So we're going to go to kind of more of a appointment-based kind of sign up. Obviously, we'll disseminate that information as to how to sign up as we kind of move forward. Illness, excuse me. Illness appointments will look different this year. Instead of coming to the athletic training room with a cold, any of that sort of stuff, all of those appointments, evaluations will be done virtually, whether through kind of WebEx that we kind of used in the spring or, over the phone. Obviously, we just don't, without knowing whether it's COVID or just a regular allergy reaction, we just need to make sure that we're not exposing unnecessarily people to that. So obviously that will be a little differently. Services like taping, for practices, stuff like that, we'll probably move those out of the athletic training room to alternate sites around our athletic facility. So just so that more student athletes can use the services hands-on kind of rehabilitation stuff with our athletic trainers than, losing out on occupancy for just someone who needs to be taped. So we'll kind of work through all this stuff once we kind of figure out, where and when practices are going to occur.
All right. Next question. What will be the academic requirements for student athletes to participate in the fall practice sessions?
The first thing that our goal is as working in college athletics and higher education is getting our kids a degree, and this is probably something we should have talked about from the get-go. And obviously this isn't the ideal situation that any of us want to be in. But the most important thing for all of you, especially the students that are out there, is getting that college degree and maintaining that academic eligibility. So if you are ever kind of pausing or waiting to see what happens, don't forget the reason why you're here is to get an education first. That's the most important thing you can do during your time here at UW-Whitewater. Hopefully win a couple games and have a lot of fun with your teammates and your coaches, but your first and foremost goal is to get a degree. So with that being said, I'm going to hand that off to Keri so she can answer that question more specifically.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. Student athletes must be at full-time status and have above a 2.0 GPA. If you are transferring in this fall semester, you still have to meet all transfer requirements from the NCAA and then the conference as well. So when we talk about full-time status, I'll just go into this real quickly. Full-time status for an undergraduate student is 12 or more credits. Full-time status for a graduate student, so if you're thinking to go move on and use graduate work, that is 9 or more credits. And then if you happen to be in your final semester before graduation, you can have less than 12 credits, but you must request approval from me for participation. Important if you're in those situations where you're getting close to your senior year or you're in your senior year, I would highly, highly recommend just running your scenario by me just to make sure we're on the same page so that we're utilizing the correct rules, because a lot of these rules have changed here the last few months, to make sure that you maintain eligibility and you maintain your academic progress, and we make sure that you're in line to graduate and take the next step of your life. So again, just full-time status and above that 2.0 threshold is really important. And then any other scenario, please reach out and ask questions.
Okay, next question. We did have a couple of submissions regarding men's and women's cross country. What are the plans for men's and women's cross country this season?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know when the plan first came out, from the WIC task force. I even had questions about that as well. And the thought behind that is that there's track and field in the spring, outdoor track and field, and the majority of cross-country runners participate in outdoor track and field. So that was the reasoning behind that there was no push to the spring with the cross country. Was just the majority of those athletes participate in track and field, and that's an opportunity for them to compete as well.
All right. Next question, and we did have a Q&A question regarding the non-traditional season. So question is, how will the non-traditional season work this fall for the spring sports?
Yeah, and a lot of this is encompassing, the answer kind of encompasses a lot of what we've talked about previously, and some of it's the 114 days that Coach Carrallo went over. Some of it is the testing that Steve went over. So best case scenario is that we're going to have a normal non-traditional, fall season for our spring sports, but we do have to finalize the testing plan and procedures and make sure that we do have enough tests for everybody. Then ultimately it's going to be up to the coaches to determine what their practice schedule wants to look like within the confines of the resocialization of sport checklist that we do have to follow per, the chancellors and WIC orders. So like I said, best case scenario, it's going to look very similar, but I can almost guarantee you it's going to be a little bit different, but we're still working through some of that. And over the next 3-4 weeks, I know the 3 or 4 of us on this call, as well as the coaches, we do have a heavy lift to get some of those questions answered. And a lot of that's going to come from across campus too. But again, it hopefully will have some normalcy to it, but there's going to be a little bit of changes, and we'll definitely update all of you once those changes come about.
Okay. Next question is regarding the winter sports season. And Ryan, we had a specific question in the Q&A about training after the campus goes to remote learning after Thanksgiving. So if you could address that as well as the status of winter sports.
Yeah, I'll kind of go backwards. So the first is the winter sports. Right now it's a go, but the WIC task force is looking to reconfigure and have some more winter sport coaches and athletes on it. So they're going to start meeting not next week, the following week, to talk about what the winter sports are going to look like. Winter sports are a pretty big deal, specifically for the NCAA. When we talk about a lot of the money makers, a lot of it's Division I March Madness basketball. So that's going to be a big question coming forward, in the next couple of months. But for us, we're still working within the parameters that are set forth by the NCAA. And once we figure out testing and we can get going on October 1st, and like I said about the previous question, and I know Coach is on here as well, it's going to be a little bit different. So I'll let Coach Carallo, if you want to kind of talk about some of the things we discussed today, about some of the things you're thinking about that aren't set in stone, but just what you're thinking about with your team once you get going.
Yeah, so it's going to look a lot different as far as what we can do from a voluntary workout perspective once we are able to implement any kind of testing. So for us, it's going to be all about what we can and can't do revolved around the testing mechanism and working with our athletic training staff. But from a facilities standpoint, really making sure that we're safe and using social distancing and masks, if we're going to be using locker room space. So some ideas that I've kind of run through is possibly for the first 2 or 3 weeks when we get back onto campus, just making sure that we're not using those spaces unless it's absolutely necessary. So we just have to really keep in mind that as much as we try to put our athletes in situations to work out and continue to be competitive, most importantly, we have to try to maintain some level of health so that we can possibly have a winter sports season. So we have to be really mindful here this fall of what we should and shouldn't be doing. So it's a work in progress, and I love that we're using the word pivot because that's a basketball term. We're going to be pivoting a lot, and we're just going to take each day as it comes. And like I've been telling our team and myself, every day, we're going to live in the moment. So each day brings something new, and we're going to take it head on.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like this virus has allowed all the coaches to use as many cliches as possible. Control the controllables. That's what we've talked about a lot, and what can we control? And ultimately, we're doing our best as administration, and I know our coaches are doing their best to control what they can control. The other question that you asked first was, what's the plan after the campus goes remote? The plan is to our athletes that are still in season and they're still practicing, allow them to live on campus. We do have a lot of student athletes that this is a safer environment than going home, whether if it's their parents that are working numerous jobs or they have a sibling that is working and exposing, them to a lot of different things. I think, staying on campus and trying to maintain that some semblance of a bubble is safer for a lot of our student athletes. And the other thing too is that without classes that are at a specific time, possibly it might open up some different practice times as well. So when this first came out that we were going remote after Thanksgiving, I was almost a little more excited because I thought it would open up some practice times for our student athletes, obviously while maintaining, the safety of our staff and athletes. But, I think for athletics, there shouldn't be a ton that change. Maybe your practice times will change, but that's about it. So, hopefully it answers the participants' question that they'll be able to stay here, they'll be able to eat in the dining halls, and they'll be able to practice with their teams.
When we do begin competition, will we consider having fans with social distancing?
That's a good question, and that's where the Division III is very different than Division I. You probably have read the news that some of the Power Five conferences are going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars without having fall sports, and our student athletes in this department is set up for the love of the game. Again, another cliche, but ultimately that's the truth. We're not playing in front of 100,000 people. We're playing in front of 20 people or 5 people or a few thousand people. So realistically, that's the beauty of this of where we're at, is that our student athletes play because they want to play. Our coaches coach because they want to coach. They want to have that relationship with those families, with those student athletes, and with some community members that are very supportive. But ultimately, that's what separates this place from a lot of others, is that we have 600 plus student athletes and 16 head coaches plus a lot more staff, that they're in it because they want to be part of this game, this whatever sport that is. And I think that really another one that separates us from a lot of other divisions and a lot of other sports. So to be quite honest with you, if we don't have fans, let's roll. That's fine. I don't think there's going to be a coach or a player that's going to mind that. And we also have a sports information director that's one of the best in the business, that's going to give stats, provide video, do everything that Chris, that you and your team does to provide the competitions in a virtual and a streaming, modality. So if we can have sports without fans, if that's going to be the thing that puts us over the edge, let's roll. Let's go without fans. But if they say you can have fans, then yeah, we'll have socially distanced. We'll have, X's on the bleachers. We'll have places where they can go. We'll have arrows. We'll have signage. We'll have all that stuff. So, like I said, we're in a good spot. We have a lot of nice facilities that are large enough where we can still accommodate a large audience while social distancing. So we'll see what happens, but either way, I just want to get out there and compete, just like the rest of, the student athletes that are on here and all the coaches that are on here as well. That's the main goal.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. Ryan, I'll pass it to you. Actually, we did just receive another question here. For the fall season, high-risk sports such as football, volleyball, will the coaches be reaching out to the players soon to let them know what the plan is for their respective, for their particular sport/team, so the athletes know what to plan for when they return?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Ultimately, Steve and Keri and myself we meet with the coaches just about we meet every week, if not every other day. with all of them. And as new information comes out, we do the best we can at disseminating and educating and everything else with those specific coaches. So yes, when it comes down to your specific sport, your coach will be reaching out to you as far as what your check-in process is going to look like, what your first meeting is going to look like, and all that stuff. So we decided as a team that we're not going to bring in anybody early. We're going to let everybody check in with the general student population, and then once everybody gets settled into their house, their apartment, their dorm room, then we'll start bringing them on campus for some meetings, for some eligibility meetings, for some other stuff like that. And hopefully by then you'll have spoken with your coach or assistant coach, position coach, whatever it may be, and they'll lay out a plan as far as the fall semester. And again, goes back to what Keri was saying. It's going to be, we're going to pivot. We're going to pivot a lot, and just be ready that what you thought you were coming into was going to be, when you woke up, it's going to be this. You might find out by 9 a.m. it's something different.
I would also add, Ryan, that if you're a student athlete and you are worried about it or it's causing you to be anxious, I would just reach out to your coach, send an email or give them a quick call or shoot them a text. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. Our coaches are doing the best job that they can to plan and prepare and get ready. But if you need an answer to help just ease some of that anxiety maybe, or wonder or worry, don't hesitate to reach out to your specific either position coach if it's football or to your head coach and ask questions.
All right, we'll take this one last question, Ryan, and then we'll wrap up. What happens for non-conference games that were scheduled this year? Do they get rescheduled?
We're still working through that. Certain sports want to roll over their schedule to next year. Certain sports don't want to roll over their schedule to next year. I think it was men's soccer was supposed to have 14 out of 21 home games this year. So of course they want to roll it over, but it's still working within, the opponents that we have. So some of the contracts were a home and a home, some were 1 year. So every sport, every coach is still working on what that next year's schedule is going to look like. So I can't answer that indefinite right now for each sport. But we'll have some of those answers once those sport committees meet with the coaches and get some answers, and obviously, check the website, for some more updates.
All right, Ryan, thank you. So we'll go ahead with your closing remarks.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for being a part of this. I can't highlight our staff enough. It is one of the best in the business, and for all of you that are student athletes and parents, just to let you know that safety is paramount, and everything we're doing over the last 4 months, every decision that has been made and every decision that will be made shortly is for your safety and the staff safety. We definitely take this very serious. It's, I wish it was in a better place right now, but it's not. So again, the good news is that Governor Evers has set aside $32 million, and that money is just going to help us, keep our student athletes and our campus community safe. But I did want to just mention one more thing, and with much of the news being taken up by coronavirus in the past 5 months, which it should have, but I just want to let you all know that our department is still committed to preventing social injustices in our community and campus and in our department. Chancellor Watson has committed resources on education and learning on social justices. And Dr. Kenny Yarbrough, who is our Chief Equity Inclusion Diversity Officer, has a series of WebExes on race and society. And I encourage you all to take a look at those. Some of them are extremely educational and they're real. And a lot of them are with your fellow students, with community members, with faculty, with staff. So just please be aware of that and check your email for the next one that's coming up, which is actually in about an hour or so. So just be mindful of that as well. And the last thing I want to say is just make sure you're check uwwsports.com for updates. Everything we talked about, including this video, will be posted on there. But if you have any further questions, please submit to the FAQ page that Chris created. And the last thing I want to say is obviously we don't want anybody's eligibility to be jeopardized. So I said this before, and I know Coach Carrallo said it. If you have any questions specific to eligibility, please contact her, or even in the FAQ, and we can get that up there and posted. But thanks again for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you all soon.
All right, at this time, the town hall is concluded. Just as Ryan's mentioned, we will be posting this town hall, this archived town hall on our website, uwwsports.com. You can also find our staff directory there if you need to contact Ryan, Keri, or Steve with any questions. So thank you for attending today.